Hi, good afternoon. Thank you all for joining us at the Ravenna Coeymans Historical Society. Could we all begin on this Veterans Day weekend by joining me in the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, and for all our veterans who may be in the audience, thank you for your service. And we do have several displays on our veterans from Coeymans and Ravenna. After the talk, please feel free to take a look at what's on display.
Your mic is not on.
Okay, maybe I'm not on. As you know, this is the 350th anniversary of the town of Coeymans, its official founding in 1673. We have one more event this year at the Historical Society, which is our annual open house. That will be on December 10th, right here, beginning at 1 o'clock and going till 3:30. It's an open house. Come on in. We should have, maybe some new displays to talk about, or if you haven't had a chance to really go through the museum, it's a great time to wander through and enjoy the company of other folks interested in history that will be joining us that day. Beginning next year, we have pretty much the spring session of talks lined up for the most part. January 14th at 2 o'clock here. Jonathan Palmer, the Greene County historian, will be talking about his research on hay press, the hay press process and hay presses. February 11th, the Reverends Antonio Booth and Dr. Roxanne Booth will be here to talk about the Great Migration. As you know, they're the now retiring pastors at the Riverview Baptist Church. March 10th, folks from the Slater will be here to reprise their talk on the history of the Slater and where it's going, and it's a great resource, especially to mention today of all times. We're still, our April program is still in flux. We hope to have an interesting talk then on April 14th. Keep an eye on our website and Facebook if you're on the Facebook for that as well. I also want to mention that we're starting our membership drive. If you are not a dues member of the organization, please consider joining us. It's very inexpensive. It's definitely worthwhile to donate to an organization like this. As you see, your resources are put to good use. It helps us to bring new exhibits and displays, and helps us bring new speakers to you on a monthly and annual basis. So that's our membership drive. Again, please consider pick up a card on your way out. And for those of you who were here 2 months ago when I did the talk on Jacob Parish, was anybody in the audience then? There's a few of you. This is a real quick snippet of the power of video and the internet. So in my talk, it's based on a portrait from about 1815 of a gentleman named Jacob Parish. That portrait shows up throughout the talk quite a bit. The talk went up online 3 days after the meeting in October, or in September, and Joe received an email from a gentleman in Long Island interested in the talk. He'd found it online and watched it, and thought he had a copy of the portrait of Jacob Parish that's shown. Joe put him in touch with me. We began a conversation. The gentleman has the original portrait of Jacob Parish, which the family had gotten rid of sometime in the 1980s. He had gone to an antique show at the New York City Armory and thought it was a great picture and picked it up and always wondered who this guy Jacob Parish was. So we became, it was an interesting conversation, and he's taken great care of the portrait, and hopefully someday it'll make its way back here. So just the wonders of history and the internet. With that, let me introduce our speaker today. Karen's first contact with the Coeymans family came through her meeting with the Ariancha, or the meeting of Ariancha, during her time at the Albany Institute of History and Art. A stately woman looking out from her portrait for 3 centuries, and for more than a decade, Karen has undertaken extensive research into her life and the lives of those around her. I think a decade is probably way too short, right? More than that. Good historians know that the strings that you need to pull on and follow in search of the truth. And Karen has unraveled a significant portion of the tapestry that makes up the lives of the Coeymans family and Ariancha. This is a particularly significant feat since 300-year-old history is exceptionally difficult to track down. The records are hard to find. Oftentimes they're in Dutch, and many are in family holdings or have been destroyed over the centuries. Her search has taken her across this country and well beyond to follow those threads. And today we are the beneficiary of that extensive research, as Karen will join us now and explain some of her research on the Coeymans family and Barent the Miller. So I want you all to welcome Karen to the podium, and we thank you for joining us today.
All right, Joe. Let's see. Press the button, right?
Hello? Did that come through?
Yes.
All right, we can start. All right, put that in the pocket. Hi, everybody. I'm glad to be here again. And like I've been telling some people, this will be the last one, so it's one and done. So here we go. So thanks, Joe. Thanks, John, for inviting me back. I have a lot to say. I'm going to keep to my script of all 141 pages. So if you don't mind my reading this, because those of you who know me know I can get distracted and take a lot of detours. So I'm going to keep to the script, but if you could hold your questions until afterwards, because I've got, I'm going to take you across an ocean, I'm going to be in another continent, I'll be this continent, I'll take you up rivers. We have a lot of territory to cover, so if you don't mind, we'll do that. So once again, thank you, Joe, thank you, John. I'm really pleased to be back in this celebration of the 350th and honoring this community, which I feel a part of now. Many of you know my interest, and some call it obsession, with the history of the Coeymans family. And of course, it did start with Bart of Ariantia, and through her I've met and become friends with many of you here today. And this presentation is my thank you for your hospitality, for answering my questions as I researched, for your sharing of time and resources and knowledge. I'd also like to acknowledge 3 members of this museum who are no longer with us today, but were really instrumental in getting me going. They offered me an outsider the warmest of welcomes. That was Ralph Beyonce and Harry Sturgis and Mary Farinelli. And so we send them our love. Okay, ready? Here we go. History is finding pieces of a puzzle and seeing where it fits. We use our background knowledge of the world to make inferences and draw conclusions. And so look at this single piece of a jigsaw puzzle. We see green, a bit of red. The green appears to be foliage. The red might be a flower in a bouquet in a garden. Who knows? Or it might be even the toe of Dorothy's ruby slipper, or the edge of a vase, or a shovel. We must add pieces to this piece to know for sure. We see more red now. We see a stem. So it is a flower, and it's configured similar to that of a tulip. But is it a tulip? We need to gather more evidence. We know we're here for the duchy, so maybe it's a tulip. Oh, look at that. It is a tulip. And not just one, but many. Tulips grow in rows. And what do we know about tulips growing in rows? They can be grown for display, like those at Washington Park in Albany each spring. Or for those of us lucky enough to have gone to the Netherlands, this might be a field of tulips grown for the export of bulbs. But still not enough information to know for sure. We widen our aperture, and beyond the field we see a flat horizon. So this isn't a city scene, so it can't be Albany. The Netherlands is also flat and requires dikes to keep out the sea, so this is a field of tulips growing in the Netherlands. Oops, snow-capped mountains, can't be the Netherlands. It isn't. The box for this jigsaw puzzle tells us the location is Japan. So we got most of it right, the cautionary tale. We'll go where the documentary evidence leads us, knowing that we may have an incomplete or even inaccurate picture. The lovely thing about researching history is that new pieces to the puzzles are always being discovered, leading us to a better picture, a better understanding. So, let's get started. If Barent Pieterse Coeymans was here today, he'd be sitting back, his legs outstretched, smoking his pipe. Because indoor smoking wasn't allowed 350 years ago. Oh, yes, it was. He would be chuckling at my interpretations and clucking at what I missed or got wrong. So with apologies to your founding father, the writing and the telling of American history is a curious thing. When the early history of this country was told, scant attention was awarded to the bit players who were brave, smart, argumentative, ambitious, lusty, and as interesting as renowned military and political heroes, financial giants, and one-time wonders. In the case of the history of New Netherlands, New York State children learned that Peter Minuit exchanged the equivalent of $26 for Manhattan, that Peter Stuyvesant had a wooden leg, and that the Van Rensselaer, Schuyler, and Livingston families were wealthy landowners and the dominant leaders of their community. And can I just take a little detour right here, and I want to thank the presence of a fellow fourth grade teacher who taught New York State history with me, Ken Smith, who's sitting in the back, and he turned me on to New York State history that allowed me to do all the rest of this. So thank you for being here, Ken. Until recently, the New York histories written for adults also neglected the smaller actors whose lives had consequence in the larger drama that played out in the colony. Some writers have attempted to correct this imbalance in the telling of our colonial past. Charles Garing and Yanni Venema of the New Netherlands Institute have published translations of colonial Dutch documents and manuscripts, an extraordinary contribution to the greater understanding and appreciation of the role the Dutch played in the settling of the country. Their work is responsible for the scholarly pursuits of many researchers. Venema's meticulous scholarship in Beverwyck and Russell Shortall's illuminating the island in the center of the world spotlight the unheralded but consequential lesser players that helped to define the complicated character of the colony of New Netherland and the country born of it. The great men would not have been as prosperous and powerful had it not been for the labor and grit of the little guys, the men and women, sometimes accompanied by children, who risked sailing over a treacherous sea to make a home in the New World, to earn a living as common laborers, tradesmen, and indentured servants. No less ignored were the stories of enslaved Africans. Barent Pieterse, who came to America as a miller's apprentice, lived a rags to riches story. Though he became wealthy in land and capital, Barent was never invited to join the patrician circle during his lifetime. After his death, his story and that of his family was largely ignored by historians. That changed when Ed Giddings wrote Coeymans and Past 50 years ago for the town's tricentennial celebration. Until Shirley Dunn's The Mohican World was published in 1990, there was no detailed explanation in any text of the land transaction between Barent and the Mohicans. And more recently, Cles Bush wrote about the development of the Coeymans patent in his book, Episodes from a Hudson River Town. Cles, raise your hand. And the book can be available where?
Look in the telephone book for my name.
There you go. Is there a telephone book in your corner?
Yeah.
So today the spotlight is on Cles and all of those others, and on Barent Pieterse as one of the many ignored, heroic, brash, assertive, supporting colonial actors indispensable to the founding of this country. Please raise your hand if you are a descendant of Barent Pieterse. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Some of you are familiar with Barent's American family. We know he had 2 wives. The first wife was a daughter of Andre DeVoe, a miller and trader who came to Fort Orange 2 years after Barent. Published genealogies assign her the name Gertrude. She gives birth to Barent's first child, a daughter also named Gertrude, and this daughter marries Jacob ten Eyck. Barent's wife, Gertrude, dies, and he begins a second family with another woman, also a daughter of Andre DeVoe.
Mm-hmm.
Published genealogies assign her the name Agnieszka. They have 3 sons and 2 daughters, as you see here. Neither of Barent's wives are ever mentioned by name in any court or church record. Albany's church records do not exist before 1683, so there are no formal records of Barent's marriages nor the baptisms of his children. Barent's father was Peter Coeymans. So Barent Pieterse Coeymans, Barent, son of Peter, colonial records document the existence in New Netherland of a brother, Lucas, and 2 sisters, Dirkje and Gertrude. That name again. Both Barent and Lucas give the name Janetje to a daughter, so we can surmise that this was also the name of their mother. Online genealogies tell us that Barent had 3 more brothers, David Pieterse, Aaron Pieterse, and Jacob Pieterse. But there is no documentary narratives that proves that they are related to Barent. They share with Barent the patronymic Pieterse, but Peter's a common name used by many families. Barent's father, Peter, is a missing piece to our puzzle, so I had to go look for him. Amsterdam. This is Amsterdam in May in 1639, the year that Barent came to the New World. A sandbank in Amsterdam's harbor prevents large ships from traveling in or out except during very high tides that are accompanied by a full moon. Barent Pieterse sits on the deck of a flat-bottomed ferry. He's young, so he's not alone. Others are making this journey with him. His back rests against baggage and goods destined for this new home. The miller, Peter Cornelis, awaits his arrival in Fort Orange. Remember that name, Peter Cornelis. The lines are released, the ferry pushes off from the dock, and it sails for the island of Texel. As his little ship approaches Texel, Barent sees a forest of masts. He jumps off onto the dock where the passengers and cargo await. It isn't long before all are ferried from the Texel dock to an ocean-going ship, Den Herrick, the Herrick. This will be Barent's floating home on the ocean for the next 3 months. He has a one-way ticket to the Dutch colony of New Netherland. Texel is a barrier island. It protects the lowland of the Netherlands from the eroding waves of the ocean. It also provides an anchorage for large sea-going vessels that couldn't make their way into Amsterdam. They load and unload their human and material cargo and prepare and repair their ships. On this map, you will see arrows that point to Texel and Amsterdam. And I was told, it says with X, that in Dutch you don't pronounce your X as we do, so it's pronounced as S, so Texel. I magnified a portion so you could more easily see 2 locations. So follow the red box. It will become important later. This is what was within that red box. This is Beverwijk. Beverwijk. Sound familiar? Hanging in the Grote Kerk, the great church of Beverwijk, is this hatchment with a name we are all familiar with. A prominently displayed hatchment assured the attention of churchgoers. The unmistakable message was, "Our family are members and benefactors of this church, and we have the wealth to be buried in it." The cows symbolize the Dutch meaning of the name, cow or cowman, an occupation this family abandoned many generations ago. The Protestant Coeymans had lived in Catholic Flanders, now northern Belgium. The family escaped religious persecution and dispersed, taking their refuge in several Dutch towns. The brothers who landed in Amsterdam and Haarlem prospered as international merchants and financiers. Beverwijk was the summer retreat of many of the Coeymans relations, including the brothers Balthazar and Johan. Their parents had 11 children. 7 of the boys who would carry the name forward. The church was used by the Coeymans family during these retreats. So fond were they of their home in Beverwyck that some chose to spend eternity here, hence the Hatchment. A note, this church is desanctified and now used as a cultural venue. The Coeymans' grave is located under a stage. So let's travel to the other town highlighted on the map, Haarlem. This is the Grote Kerk of Haarlem, St. Bavo. I went there looking for the members of the Coeymans family. First I found in place of honor the grave of Frans Hals, the painter. In a small chapel near the altar, and now used as a cafe, was the burying spot of another Coeymans brother. The remains of Josephus, or Joseph, we'll just call him Joseph, his wife Dorothea Burke, and their daughter Isabella. They're among the that are resting underneath the heavy stone. Joseph increased his father's fortune by investing in the bleaching fields in Bloemendaal outside of Haarlem. He sold the linen from these fields, and in this painting you can see the sheets of linen bleaching in the sun. In the distance is the town of Haarlem, made small by the prominent church of St. Bavo. Josephus was a prominent member of that church and that town, and he was referred to in documents in lofty terms, the Lord of Bochum and Newhall. Perhaps you are wondering what Josephus and Dorothea and Isabel look like. Not in the bone, but in the flesh. I can show you. And thanks to the family's ability to pay Frans Hals for portraits. Seated here, turned toward each other, are Josephus Coeymans and his wife Dorothea Burke. Below and between is their daughter Isabella, resplendent and radiant. I did not include the companion portrait of Isabella's beaming husband, also painted by Frans Hals. All 4 were painted in 1644, the year of Isabella's marriage, 5 years after Barent Coeymans came to this country. How do we know this? A shield with a distinctive 3 steer heads is painted in each portrait. You can see it at the top, and it says "Atata Sue." It's Latin, which means "in this time." It's written along with the sitter's age and the year, so we know Joseph's shield, he's 52, and the year that it was painted 1644. And as you can see, these paintings reside now in the United States, in Hartford and Baltimore, and Isabella is part of the Rothschild collection in Paris. We have another Coeymans portrait. I love this. He's a real rogue. He's a dandy, isn't he? This is Willem Coeymans. He's in Washington, D.C. Frans Hals painted again an Attas Sue. It is 1645, and Willem is 26. So it's about the time that you figure that Barent would have been about this age. You know, so if you're looking for kind of a conception of what Barent would have been, he's a young man right now. And Frans Hals painted it here and again in the Civic Guard, and you can see him circled in red and how much alike they look because with mirror images of one another. Willem's father was Conrad, and some of you know the name Conrad from the Ten Eycks. He was a cousin of Joseph Coeymans. Joseph's other brothers lived in Amsterdam, and I'd like you to meet them. So this is a scene as it appeared in 1670 alongside the Keizergracht Canal in Amsterdam, the city home of Joseph's brothers Balthazar and Johann. Imagine you are standing next to the easel of the painter of this picture. Your perspective is of the canal, the bridge that crosses it, the buildings on the other side. In the center of the canvas is an impressive building with staircase on either side of the elevated door, and a gable rises directly above the door. Behind this building is an even larger building, perhaps a church, as it is a looming clock and bell tower to call worshippers. But let's take another perspective of this scene. So here you see, it's a bird's eye perspective, the same location, but farther on down the canal. So here again is the Keizergracht, home of Amsterdam's wealthiest families on the Dutch Golden Age. Circled, you can see the same building we saw in the last slide. but from a different perspective. And indeed, there is a church to one side and a bit behind it. This is the Westerkerk. Perhaps some of you are familiar with it if you visited Amsterdam. The home of Anne Frank is right here around the corner, where the blue arrow is. But did you look across the canal at this building here? An orange arrow is pointing to a garden behind a house. Compare the size of this house and the property to others. It's significantly larger. This is the home of Joseph Coeymans' brother, Balthazar Coeymans. The other brother, Johann, lives next door. They're married to sisters who are also from a rich and powerful family. Later in this Coeymans story, we'll hear of others who marry sisters. After the death of their father, Balthazar and Johann continued the family business of international trade and sponsors of merchant ships. At the crown of this building, Johann had placed the Coeymans coat of arms with the heads of 3 steer next to that of his wife's family, and it's still there. Balthazar Coeymans was the second richest man in Amsterdam. In 1631, he was worth 400,000 guilders. That equates to about $24 million in today's dollars. Kaisergracht 177 is the house that Balthazar built in 1624. His neighbor, the patroon of New Netherland, Kilian van Rensselaer. He lived by in Kaisergracht 118. The transom window over the door speaks to the family business, international maritime trade. The commodities were spices, textiles, gold, silver, iron, and later in the century, slaves. Once the home of slave traders, today this building is the headquarters of Amnesty International. You love that, I do. I was allowed entry and given permission to take a photo of the plaque that was placed in the lobby to commemorate the family who lived there. Notice that the spelling of the family name is with an E, unlike Joseph back in Haarlem, who was without the E. So it is off to church again to see how the Amsterdam family wanted posterity to spell their name. This is how the outer kirk would have appeared to Barent Pieterse. It's not much different today, except the dogs aren't allowed. 12,000 people are buried in here, and 2,500 graves. Interred here is Adrian Block, who explored and mapped the land and waterways of what he labeled New Netherlands. Also here is Kilian van Rensselaer, diamond merchant, director of the West India Company and patroon of Rensselaerwyck. Today this church is located in the middle of Amsterdam's red light district. Here's the exterior of the church and the red light district alongside it. Inside is the Elizabeth Govan side chapel, the final resting place of Balthazar and Johann Coeymans, their wives, and many of their children and in-laws. And here I am again, kneeling at a Coeymans grave. Well, not just a grave. As you can see, Balthazar and Johann spelled their name a bit differently than their brother in Haarlem. And here it appears as our American town spells it. Along with the Coeymans' bovine hatchment, the stone is carved with the shields and names of 16 in-laws. Balthazar and his wife had 11 children, just like his father, so it was crowded down below. It cost money to be buried in a church, and with so many rotting bodies in a church, it could get pretty stinky and pretty smelly, and hence the expression, stinking rich. Was Barent related to this wealthy Dutch family? Let's keep reading. Well, nope, not yet. Well, did I do it right, Joe? I did. Well, he was chosen by the Amsterdam Coeymans neighbor, Kilian van Rensselaer, to sail to his North American patroonship. Yeah, he was. So whether in lineage or locus, Barent was in close proximity to Balthazar's family. In looking for Barent's roots, we begin with his patronymic. The father of Barent Pieterse was Peter. We search for the orange thread that connects Barent in North America with his father across the ocean, Pieter Coeymans. But before I show you what I found in the archives in Amsterdam and The Hague, let's apply the Goldilocks principle to Pieter Coeymans. If I found a man with his name, his age cannot be too old or too young. It must be just right, within a probable range to be Barent's father. We know when Barent arrived in New Netherlands. So Barent's age, we've got some possibilities from 10 to 15. The Van Rensselaer Bowery manuscripts tell us his ship sailed into the harbor of New Amsterdam on July the 7th, 1639. But Barent's age when he set foot in America is unknown, except that he was described in the manuscript as jongen, boy. So we don't know the year of his birth. We know that Barent's first milling job after his apprenticeship was in 1645, the third in the middle column. We know his first child, Gertrude, was born in 1654. So that's the fourth column. And we also know that he died in 1710. That's the fifth column. So if he had been only 10 when he arrived, he would have been born in 1629 if he had been and had his first job at 16 and had become a father at age 25 and died when he was 81. On the older side, if he had been 15 when he arrived, he would have been born in 1624, had his first job at 21, become a father at 30, and died when he was 86. Why is this important? To answer the question of Barent's paternity and connection to the wealthy Dutch Coeymans family, we need to find a Pieter Coeymans who would be able to father a child between 1614 and 1629. Everybody got it? Anybody want me to go over that again? Wow, you're so smart. Good. So here is the male line of the Dutch Coeymans, beginning with the founding father, Hieronymus Coeymans, who is noted here as the first generation. Following in the second generation, all twos, are Hieronymus's 5 sons. Conrad, a name that was later used by the Ten Eycks, Thomas, Hieronymus, Gasper or Casper, it was used both ways, and Balthazar. If we are to find Barent's father, it would be in the second or third generations. As you can see, the Casper had a son he named Conrad, and Conrad had a son he named Peter. I'll leave this family tree for a moment, come back to it. And here is a genealogy from the Netherlands that shows Conrad's son, Peter. You'll notice that the patronymic Conrad has been inverted with the Coeymans surname. So it says Pieter Coeymans Conrad. We learned that he was baptized on January the 3rd, 1629 in Newkirk. So he was born about the time Barent was, so that rules out this Peter as Barent's father. If you were wondering, the word after the name translates as unmarried. So we return back to this. So we've crossed out now that Peters, he's no longer a candidate. We look for another branch of the family tree. The youngest son of Hieronymus was Balthazar, born in 1555. He had many sons, some died young. We have already met 3 of his sons, Balthazar and Johan in Amsterdam, Joseph in Haarlem. And all the way at the bottom, there's another brother, Peter. He's included because of one Dutch genealogist who suggests there was another brother named Peter. But there's no date of birth for this Peter. I find him in several online genealogies, but as you well know, online genealogies can be unreliable, untrustworthy, false information is repeated as gospel. So given the ages of the other brothers, this Peter could be Barent's father. But what's required? Primary sources, and they are in the archives in Amsterdam and The Hague. So, here we go. Let's go to Amsterdam and The Hague. Very quickly, I come across Barent Pieterse. His name is spelled differently in two places. At the end, one with a T, one with a D. As you can see there, this Barent Pieterse was an adult working not for the West India Company, but for the East India Company between 1634 and 1640. Wrong place, wrong time, wrong person. It's not surprising there is someone who shares our Barent's name. Where I live, there are two other Karen Hesses who are not related to me, and all of us for teachers. This is a handwritten genealogy that I found, and within it one could read that the Coeymans' daughters married men named Peter. But no child named Peter was born to a Coeymans man that I had found yet. So I needed to keep going. But a word first about the umlaut that's over the Y. Those are the two little dots. Or is it written C-O-I? Both Joseph in Haarlem and Balthazar in Amsterdam had Y carved on their gravestones. As for pronunciation, I'm told by my Dutch friends to say Coeymans. And even that isn't close to it. They would be standing here, they go, no, no, nay, nay, nay. But then one friend is from Friesland, and the dialect is different from that in Amsterdam. But you will often see the C-O-I dot, J dot, and if you don't dot those two, what does it end up looking like? A Y. What I found here is a book of detailed genealogies. I was hoping to find Peter, who was a brother of Balthazar and Johan in Amsterdam and Joseph in Haarlem. I only found one Peter Coeymans. But he was born too late and died in Indonesia while working for the East India Company. But there was a colorful Coeymans hatchment, so that was pretty cool. At the archives in The Hague, I was given this book. The writing on the cover dates the contents from October 1626 to 1627. I was told I would find a Peter Coeymans inside. I'm not sure when this book was last opened, but when I opened it, there was sand on the pages used to blot the ink that remained on the pages. I can't tell you what a thrill that was. Sure enough, there was a Peter Coeymans. The year 1626 to 27 fell within the parameters of this being Barent's father. So I check a box. And he was described as being a miller. Check another box. Oh, wait a minute. This is a miller of oil. So there was a word that was like oiler molinar. And so that was, he would take linseed and make it into linseed oil. So, okay, oil ground from seeds like linseed, they are transferable skills. Milling seeds to a grist mill or a sawmill. Perhaps you notice something, his name, Peter Cornelis Coeymans. Remember Peter Cornelis? He's the man that's going to meet Peter here in Albany, Fort Orange. He is the man that Peter is going to do his apprenticeship with. Now I have a Peter Cornelis. Could it be that that man he's going to meet is his father? This is Peter's patronymic, his middle name. This could be. I've gone through quite a few Coeymans genealogies and not come across a Cornelis. But I've heard that name before, and now you have too. Barent was described in the Van Rensselaer Bowery manuscripts as jongen, which translate as boy. The Dutch word for son is zoon, a word not used to describe the relationship, at least in the manuscript, to Barent. So this discovery doesn't make it any easier. I'm beginning to despair and wonder if Peter Coeymans existed or if Barent just borrowed the name out of an illustrious Dutch family once he was thousands of miles across an ocean. Church records. I love church records. Names of relations, dates of birth, deaths, marriages. And on the 17th of June, 1628, there is, you can read 27-year-old Lodewijk de Bos and 20-year-old Magdalena van der Bruggen. They had their banns read. And the engaged girl is a granddaughter of Euronymous Coeymans, the patriarch of the Coeymans dynasty. And the witnesses were her grandmother, Katrina Coeymans, and her cousins, Urian Straught and Peter Coeymans. Their church wedding was held a month later on the 14th of July, 1628. So I've got a guy here who's old enough to stand up for his cousin in a wedding, then he's old enough to have a baby. And if he's old enough to have a baby, he's old enough to be Barent's father. This Peter Coeymans stood again as witness at the wedding. So finally, I've got documentary evidence that within the Coeymans family, there is a Peter who fits the age parameters. But I found more in this book. In the Amsterdam archives is a signed document, and it entitled Bequests to the Almoner's Poor and to the orphanage. And almoner is somebody who gives money to an almshouse. An almshouse is the house of where the poor are given food and sustenance. This is dated October 6, 1628. So as I was saying, an almoner was someone who distributes alms, money, food, clothing, shelter to those who could not afford the essentials of life. Almshouses were set up to accommodate the poor, the infirmed, or the elderly. Even Franz Hals was a resident of an almshouse at the end of his life. But that's not all that they also were supplying the monies to an orphanage. The benefactors of almshouses and orphanages were the regents, the wealthy members of the community who handled the financial and organizational affairs of these charities. And who are the benefactors to the almshouse and the orphanage mentioned in this book? All were members of the Coeymans family. 4 members of the Van Bruggen cousins, Balthasar, Constantia, Conrad, Isaac Coeymans. Some of those names appear in the margin. And above, so this is the portion, that big page you saw, this is in the margin. Above the orange arrow, you can read those names, and below the orange arrow is Thomas Coeymans, and the orange arrow points to Peter Coeymans. And where is the orphanage and the almshouse supported by the Coeymans family? It's on Wijk aan Zee, a village in the municipality of Beverwijk, where the Coeymans have their country homes. It's 1628. Peter Coeymans belongs to the wealthy Coeymans family of Amsterdam. He is an adult, old enough to be a father, but is he the father of Barent Pieterse Coeymans? So, some pieces have fallen into place, but one important one remains. Could Barent Pieterse, the miller, be the son of Peter Coeymans of the wealthy Amsterdam merchant family? If Barent's last name truly was Coeymans, why is he so difficult to find in the Netherlands? I contacted the people in Utrecht. Utrecht, in the Van Rensselaerbauer manuscripts, says that Barent came from Utrecht. But the people in Utrecht said they've never heard of Barent Coeymans, that I should go to Amsterdam. I went to Amsterdam. I went to The Hague. Couldn't find him. If Barent was a child of this prominent family, why didn't they acknowledge the blood ties? Was Barent the illegitimate son of a strict Calvinist father, a member of the Coeymans family? Did the family in 1628 endow an orphanage in Wick-on-Sea because a baby had to be hidden there? When the baby was growing into adulthood, did this family send him away to North America so that he would disappear and not jeopardize their standing in Amsterdam? And did the family send him to Rensselaerwyck, where their friends and acquaintances in the Wick, that's a West India Company, and along with the Kaisergracht friends, could track his progress as he takes advantage of the opportunities offered there? Or less likely, did Killian Van Rensselaer just pick a waif up off the street or a dock and send him to America? When it came time for Barent to use a surname, did he get cheeky and take the name of the rich Amsterdam family that he and the Van Rensselaers were well acquainted with? I did not find this missing piece, but I hope someday someone will, and I hope somebody who is a doctoral student looking for a dissertation is listening to me and online and coming to visit me, and I'm going to give them everything. Let's return to Barent and Tesla. It's May 1639. The West India Company is sending their ship, the passengers and the cargo, to New Amsterdam. There's excitement and uncertainty on board. Barent and the other passengers are unfamiliar with ocean crossings. Many will be sick, and the stench and the closeness below will send others to the top deck for air. It is the beginning of summer. The breeze is fresh, the sun is warming. Perhaps they meet some rough weather along the way. After Jeremiah Van Rensselaer sailed to the Netherlands in 1656, he wrote to his mother of his ocean voyage. And this is what he said. The weather became so bad that our ship could hardly keep a sail set. The wind kept blowing furiously from the east-southeast. We drifted toward the shore on our lee and passed a dreadful night, not knowing whether it was flat strand or a steep high cliff we were approaching. In the morning we saw land, the weather being fair. We were about 12 miles from Sandy Hook. Thereafter we had fine weather, but during the day there was either so much fog that we did not dare approach the shore, or we were unable to do so on account of contrary wind. Barent arrived safely in New Amsterdam on the 7th of July, 1639. North America is now his home. In all of New Netherland, from the upper Hudson to Delaware, there are no more than 1,000 people. Barent has one last leg of his journey to Fort Orange, the economic center of the Van Rensselaer patroonship, Rensselaerwyck. It's 150 miles more to go, north on the river that Hudson traveled. He's contracted to work for 6 years on the Normanskill under the charge of the miller, Peter Cornelis. He's paid 30 florins the first 2 years, or about $600. It will increase 20 florins every 2 years thereafter. Barent chooses milling, or was it chosen for him? Killian Van Rensselaer selects people who could ensure the ongoing prosperity of his American patroonship. As the colony grows in population, the population of beavers declines. The patroonship looks to wood as their cash crop, trees into timber. That's where the millers come in. Barent is becoming a miller at the right place and the right time. Milling is a career with job security. But first, Barent, the young and the boy, will assist Peter Cornelis and learn from him. Bound for Fort Orange. Propelled by wind, tide, and ambition, Barent Pieterse Coeymans sails 125 miles up the Hudson. The boat floats towards Barent, Mosimus, Skodak Islands, the latter being the home of the Mohegan sachems' council fire. Barent's boat follows the river's shallow channel, squeezing between Barent Island and the west shoreline of the river. The yacht is close enough that this wide-eyed boy clearly sees the features, the clothing, and the tools of the Mohegan Indians who, having returned from their winter homes in the forests, are filling their baskets with their harvested fishes. Far from the flat terrain of his Dutch home, the vision of scantily clothed natives standing before a backdrop of hills, mountains, exceeds Barent's imaginings of this unfamiliar and untamed world. When the shoals, shallow waters, and tides stall their progress, Barent gazes westward over the rails of the yacht. He commits to memory this new world of possibility, attuned to the hydraulic needs of a miller, because he knows this is what he's going to be trained to do. He takes note of the two creeks that empty into the mighty river just north and south of Barent Island. Plummeting hundreds of feet from the Helderberg escarpment, the precipitous final drop in elevation develops into a series of waterfalls. And above he sees an expanse of virgin forest, the resource for timber. Out of sight is fertile ground and outcrops of limestone, sources for the operation of grist and plaster mills. Location, location, location. The Cascading Creek is 11 miles south of Fort Orange, 125 miles north of New Amsterdam, and just short of the Overslaw. That's the shallow area in the river that halted the progression of Hudson's ship, the Half Moon, the Havamane. This is a most advantageous spot to amass a fortune. With dreams of financial success in the New World, the youthful and ambitious Barent imagines that long stretch of cascading water as potential home to mills operated and owned not by the Van Rensselaer Patroon, but by himself, Barent de Molenaar, Barent the Miller. This map of Albany was made 60 years after Barent's arrival. It's a far cry from the frontier settlement of 1639, and is a far cry from the cosmopolitan areas and the cities in Netherlands. What you see, the streets, the stockade, the fort at the top of the hill, the church, the extensive gardens, the orchards, they came after Barent's arrival. Barent's boat leaves him at Fort Orange. It's described 4 years later by a French Jesuit priest as a wretched little port built of logs. This colony is composed of about 100 people who reside in some 20 or 30 houses built along the river. All the houses are merely made of boards, their roofs thatched, and as yet there's no mason work except for the chimneys. The forest furnished many of their large pines. They make boards by means of their mills, which they have for that purpose. Life requires food and liquid and shelter, and all those necessities require a miller. The sawmill provides beams and planks for timber-framed buildings and boats. Mills provide lumber to carpenters for the making of tables and cupboards. In addition to beer, the mainstay of the colonial diet is carbohydrate-laden bread. Colonists eat bread throughout the day for both energy and nutrition, and without the miller and the brewer, the colony literally won't survive. The miller of saw and grist mills is simply indispensable to this frontier colony. Does Peter Cornelis have to teach Barent the Youngin everything about milling? Maybe Barent was a child of a miller. If so, then he's familiar with maintaining a mill and producing a quality product from it. If he's a child from an orphanage, he knows nothing and has to learn everything. And it is a daunting skill set. The work is arduous, the hours long, physical strength a prerequisite. The trees are cut from virgin forest. The planks are long, they're wide, they're thick, very heavy. The bags of grain and later flour are also hefty. The granite millstones alone weigh as much as a ton. The work is dangerous. Hands, feet, even limbs can be lost in gears and saws and belts, crushed by millstones, literally run through the mill. Fire threatens the mill itself as a distracted miller who is milling around. Does it hear the stones rubbing together? Keep your ears to the wheel. Barent learns how to judge the hydraulics of siting a mill. Does it have a good fall of elevation, adequate and constant water flow, space to dam a mill pond, room for mill races, shoreline space for both the mill, storage and transport of product by boat. He also has to learn how to dam the water to create a mill pond, construct the gates and the channels that control the flow of water flowing to and away from the mill, and to build shoreline protections against erosion. And of course, he has to learn how the mill works, how to construct the mill building and its wheels, gears, axles, shafts, bins, scuppers, belts, you name it. And Barent learns how to make a quality product. Flour that has a consistent ground, not burnt, not bumpy. Boards that are straight without blemish. And lastly, Barent has to learn the economics of milling, how to estimate the cost so profit is assured, how to maintain records of payments due to him and by him. There's a very long list of attributes. He's young, strong, hard worker, bright, eager to learn more. But Barent has one more attribute that the Van Rensselaers don't appreciate till it's too late. He's ambitious. And that will cost the Van Rensselaers something they value more than anything else: land. This is a page from the memorandum book of Anthony de Houses. Forgive my pronunciation. Houses is described in the introduction as the longest serving commissioned employee of the platoonship of Rensselaerwick under Dutch rule. Kilian Van Rensselaer instructs him to keep a full diary of everything worthy of note which occurs to you. And he does. Contracts, commissions, purchases, transactions, observations, including the sighting of a white whale swimming in the river that flows past Albany. And within the book are 4 early references to Barent. An agreement in 1643, just 4 years after his arrival, but it was not recorded until 47. And another agreement in return to performing his previous work in 43 at the grain mill for 18 florins per mouth, plus board. It also records the hiring of Barent for as long as I wish, for the same amount as before. And it also records a new contract under which Barent and Jan Timmerman will both tend the sawmill and receive 3 stivers for each cut and 125 guilders annually. He's referred to as Barent Pieterse. Not yet Barent Coeymans, not yet Barent the Miller. That will come later. A poem written for children in 1866 pays tribute to Albany's white whale and Barent. And Pieterse Coeymans called Barent the Miller, whose name in the manor was ever a pillar. That was written 200 years afterwards. They used his name. This is how Barent signed his contracts. It's an X. Barent is unable to write. Either he wasn't taught how to write in an orphanage, or he was a child of poor parents who could not afford schooling for their son. Barent leaves Peter Cornelius' tutelage in 1645, 6 years after his arrival. He joins Jan Gerritsen, and the two are in charge of a sawmill and a grist mill on Patroon's Creek, north of Fort Orange. He may be as young as 16, but that responsibility might have been given to a teenager with a partner. After all, Kilian Van Rensselaer sent his 18-year-old grandnephew, Arend van Kruller, a name that you're familiar with, to Rensselaerswyck to act as his secretary of the patroonship. The next year, Barent's master, Peter Cornelius, returns to the Netherlands. Barent and Jan take over his mill. Jan dies 2 years later, and Barent finds himself another partner, Rutger Jacobsen, and together they lease a sawmill and a grist mill on the Fifth Creek. The partners owe the patroonship 8 chickens and 550 florin in rent each year, payable in Ceylon, that's the wampum, all right, or beaver skins that are cleaned, stretched, and dried, and ready to be packed and flat for shipping to Europe. The director of the patroonship will provide the men 2 stallions, and the Fifth Creek is also home to a sawmill run by Andre de Vos. The partners then pay another 125 florin for the water rights on the mill that de Vos operates. Barent and Rutger are getting very busy investing in their financial futures. Barent is also busy romancing de Vos's daughter. So Barent marries de Vos's daughter, Gertrude. was born, their daughter that was born in 1654. Peter Stuyvesant, representing the Dutch West India Company, WIC, arrives in New Netherlands and demands jurisdiction and management of Fort Orange, the locus of native Dutch fur trading and the center of Rensselaer patroonship. So in 1652, Stuyvesant and WIC prevail. Betterwick's boundary is established by the distance of a cannon shot from the fort. The Van Rensselaers lose that vital trading area, but they retain the rest of their patroonship. It's about this time that Barent's siblings begin to appear regularly in the colonial records. Barent's brother, Lucas, arrives on the documented scene in 1650. His lack of restraint frequently gets him into hot water. Lucas he assaults a sheriff, and is fined 60 guilders. He's locked up in irons after a tavern break-in and a brawl. Another tavern owner, Peter Bronk, name you're familiar with, sues him for the 193 florins he owes for food and drink. Lucas breaks a tavern window and while carrying a knife, climbs in, taps a keg, and proceeds to pour beer for himself and onlookers. Despite there being witnesses, Lucas swears he did not break the window. And like his brother, Barent, Lucas is a miller, but across the river on the east side of the Hudson. He grinds corn and meal for the patroon. He's in constant debt and is congratulated for his good inclination when he contributes one piece of aid to the maintenance of the new minister. Perhaps wanting to put his youthful indiscretions behind, Lucas leaves the upper Hudson for the Jerseys. At that time, there was an East and West Jersey. There wasn't just a New Jersey. There he mills on the Second River, and he begins a family in Belleville. Descendants in New Jersey still carry the Coeymans name, as opposed to anybody up here. As a girl, I rode my bike in New Jersey on Coeymans Avenue in Belleville. Barent's partner, Rutger, branches out. He becomes commissioner of Beverwijk. And in that role, he lays the cornerstone for the first church in Albany, and this stained window with his name is installed in it. Rutger dies. His estate is offered for sale in December 1665. Barent pays a total of 84 florins in Siwan, or furs. He could choose whichever, because there was no currency, no coin, no paper money. So you paid, with what was there. The currency that was beaver skins, it was Siwan. So what does he buy? A slate with frame to make marks, noting the number of planks and bags of grain. 2 fire locks, muskets. A necessity is he lives beyond the safety of the wall of the stockade. A pair of stockings, a pair of breeches. And the last purchase, the man who signs with an X buys 2 books. There's a second sale. It's of silverware and jewelry. But Barent purchased nothing from this sale of luxuries, just what he needs. Without stores, estate auctions are good places to buy household and business necessities. Barent's sister, Dirkie, dies in 1665, and her belongings are sold to settle debts. Barent buys a shovel, tongs, hammer, chopping knife, and a pewter platter. He's newly married in 1655, and when he pays the equivalent of 84 guilders in good whole beavers for a petticoat, a Turkish coat, and 2 millstones. And when Barent's daughter Gertje is 5 years old, he attends another auction and purchases 2 children's caps for 8 guilders, 16 stivers. The child would soon be motherless. This is Barent's sister Gertrude standing in the doorway, and she has a lot in common with her brothers Lucas and Barent, as we will see later. All 3 are volatile millers, and the court is well acquainted with each. Gertrude marries twice. Her first husband, Abraham Vosper gets into a dispute over the boundaries of a garden in Fort Orange, and she is summoned to court 3 times, but she fails to comply. The court admonishes Gertrude to be more punctual and not say anything about the court and the defendants that's not honorable and of good repute. Sound familiar to what's going on lately? Her husband dies 5 years later in the Esopus War, leaving Gertrude with at least 5 children, and instead of getting married, Gertrude gets a lawyer. After 3 rounds of litigation, she secures ownership of the mill. Gertrude has the means to support a family, but makes the mistake of marrying again. And off to court she goes again. She complains that she married her husband, Albert Brott, with regrets. He's not the mildest of men. He neglects his household. He owes me money. That counters saying, I cannot live with her. She does not do what a wife ought to do and is not entitled to a penny. He wants an annulment. The exasperated court orders Brat to live properly with your wife, and that Brat pay his wife 80 skepels of apples. Pay his wife 80 skepels of apples, like bushels of apples. What you gonna do with them? In 1675, Gertrude claims that assault and batteries committed on her and her daughter by Barent's unnamed wife and daughter. But Barent's little girl, Ariancha, is just 3 years old. And Barent's other daughter, by his first wife, is 21. She's not yet married to Barent Teneyck, or Jakob Teneyck. Gertrude won that case against her sister-in-law, who's ordered to pay 50 guilders in Siwan. Gertrude claims a neighbor stole a silver spoon, so she withheld the 5 skepels of wheat, which he had earned working for her. She lost that case. Gertrude is brought to court again for failing to pay 150 beaver skins for a farm in Kinderhook. She lost that case as well. Bridesmaids traditionally wear these headpieces to a wedding. Gertrude maintains she lent bridesmaids crowns that were not returned and that she was not paid for their use. Finally, she won that one. But Barent also has to answer for his behavior in court. Let me read this translation by Charlie Guerin. The Honorable Andres Herbertson, magistrate, has declared before the court that on the 27th of this month, 1656, a Maquis Indian came quite drunk into his house, and after committing many acts of violence, left some goods in his house. Coming the other day to the said house to fetch his goods, the Indian declared that the wine which made him drunk was fetched by 3 Indian women from Barent Pieterse Molinar. Barent was then married to his first wife. Their daughter was just 2 years old, and he's given away alcohol. The milling of timber is rigorous, but it wasn't all work for Barent Pieterse. He and a companion sit before the door of Jakob Adrin's tavern, probably enjoying a pipe and a beer, when the tax collector arrives to gauge the casks for the wine and the beer that Jakob Adrins had in his cellar. Adrian's response, he was not going to let the tax collector in. Not recorded is the response of Barent and his companion. The official left unsatisfied, but we can imagine there was uproarious laughter and the downing of more beer by Barent and his companions. A week before Christmas, in 1662, the church deacons received from Barent de Molinar, now he's being called Barent de Miller, de Molinar. They received 8 florins for a large black pall to cover a coffin, most likely for his deceased first wife, who again was the daughter of Andre de Vos. Barent is now a widow with a young daughter, Gertrude, who's just 8 years old. He now appears in the official records as Barent de Molinar, Barent de Miller. Coeymans will come later. In the early days of the colony, European men greatly outnumbered European women. The strictures of living in the wilderness were more relaxed than in Europe. In 1655, New Netherlands settler and chronicler Adrian van der Donck, who arrived in 1641, 2 years after Barent, recorded his initial impression of native peoples. One finds many handsome and graceful persons and faces among both men and women, but for those who associate with them frequently, the strangeness soon passes, and it seems that their women folk have an attractive grace about them. For several Dutchmen, before many Dutch women had to be had there, became infatuated with them. Even Kilian van Rensselaer's nephew, Arend van Curler, had a child with a Mohawk woman. And this did not damage his relationship with her people. Arend left the Hudson River, and he settled in the Mohawk in remote Schenectady. So did the baker Jacob Borsboom, along with his wife Gertrude, who was also a Mohawk. Their daughter married Jan Mabie, and were given the property by the Mohawks for their new home. It is now the historic Mabie Farm, operated by the Schenectady County Historical Society. There were many other recorded cases of European men living with native women and having children together. I believe that it is likely that after his first wife died, Andre Defoe, who lived near the Indian houses that were built by the Van Rensselaers for the accommodation of the Mohawks who were coming in to trade into the Fort Orange and Beverwyck area, that he had a relationship with a native woman whose name is never documented in any official record, even though you may be given a name. And together they had a daughter. And this daughter of Andre Defoe and the unnamed woman, who was recorded as being the mother of Barent's second family, is a long and fruitful relationship. Barent and Defoe's daughter have 3 sons and 2 daughters. And her name never appears in colonial or family records, though some genealogists identify her as Agnetti. So we will call her that. Another long relationship that ends on the 25th of August, 1682, when Barent again pays for the use of a long pole. And again the name of the person who dies is not recorded. The pole may have covered the coffin of either Andre Defoe or his daughter Agnetia, the second wife of Barent Pieterse. There's one piece of visual evidence that Barent's second wife might be a native woman, and you know what I'm going to show you. This is Ariadne Coeymans, the daughter of Barent Coeymans, painted in 1723. It's a marriage portrait. She's a spinster. She's 51 years old. Her husband, David Verplank, he's 28. Unfortunately, we do not have portraits of any of her brothers or sisters. And when I present this portrait to Mohican descendants, they comment on how much her features resemble American indigenous peoples. I believe this to be true. I also believe, it's a belief, all right, I'm not proving it, this is my belief, that it is likely that Barent's lasting relationship with the mother of Ariantia and her 4 siblings contributed to the favorable relationship the local Mohicans had with Barent Coeymans. Timing is almost everything. We talked about location. The Dutch surrendered the colony to the English in 1664. The Upper Hudson had been the Wall Street of native Dutch fur trading, an enterprise that relied on an unsustainable commodity. Barent's future lay in milling, and that meant owning land and controlling water rights. What he had in mind is quietly audacious. The Van Rensselaers will not be happy, but Barent had never and will never let the concerns of good relations with the patroons get in the way of his ambitions. Lovelace. To strengthen their territorial claims, the new English governor, Francis Lovelace, issues new land patents to residents of the colony. Barent takes advantage of this situation. He covets the creek with the waterfalls he first saw 33 years earlier as a young'un, a boy, traveling to his new home in Port Orange. In 1672, he and members of the Catskill Mohicans agreed to a land contract. The Catskill Mohicans were those who lived south of Barren Island. He presents his contract to Governor Lovelace. On the 7th of April, 1673, the English governor, Lovelace, approves a governmental patent for the land to Barent and his heirs and assigns forever. Barent is so lucky because just 4 months later, the Dutch regained control of the colony. So long, Governor Lovelace. The door shuts on the issuance of patents either by the English or the Dutch. 15 months later, the English take back control of the colony, but not one patent is awarded for the next 8 years. This is my map, and forgive my self-made map, it's not to scale, but I want to give you an idea of the patent in relation to Rensselaerwyck. The car driving on the New York Thruway passes through the entire length of the former Coeymans patent. The southern boundary begins close to exit 21B, Coxsackie Ravine, and the northern boundary is just north of exit 22, Selkirk. The river boundary of the patent is described in the contract being at the Coxsackie Creek, or Kill, lying and being on the west side of Hudson's River, and to the south of the island belonging to Jan Ryers. Using Google Maps, I figured out that that's 11 miles as the crow flies along the shoreline. Again, from the contract it reads, from the south of the island belonging to Jan Ryers, you go into the woods as far, well, they didn't say you go, I'm adding that, into the woods as far as the Indian sachem's right goes. Using Google Maps again, it's about 12 miles to the foot of the Helderbricks, beyond which is Mohawk land. So that's 132 square miles, about 84,000 acres. In the colony at that time, only one family-owned tract purchased with a signed native deed was larger, the patroonship of the Van Rensselaers, not the Skyers, not the Livingstons. The northern half of the Coeymans patent audaciously overlaps Rensselaerwyck. This land deal is a land grab, which the Patroons family cannot ignore. And it's my belief that Barent and the Catskills have a mutually advantageous agreement. Barent gets all the land and the water rights he desires. In turn, the Mohicans get sanctuary to live and hunt and fish and farm at a time of great peril to their existence on the river. Many Mohicans were moving east to Stockbridge and to Scaghtikoke. And I believe it's very likely that Mohicans trusted Barent because he has an abiding relationship with a woman with whom he had 5 children. And she was Mohican. This map, I'm sure some of you are familiar with, is made for Killian Van Rensselaer, and it showed him the river patroonship he named after himself, Rensselaerwyck. At the top is the map in its entirety. The Coeymans patent is on the left, marked with red lines. The bottom is a close-up of the area in the black box. The arrow on the left points to Barren Island. The small red arrow nearby points the line in Dutch that translates, "This kill has a waterfall." And now it's Coeymans Creek. The arrow on the far right points to Smack Island, the northeast corner of Barent's patent. This portion of the beautiful Vingaboom Hudson River map is at the Library of Congress. Again, Barren Island and Smacks Island are noted. And what I find of interest are the round top shapes near Coeymans Creek. I'm told they indicate indigenous structures, not buildings built by the Dutch. This map was drawn in the 1640s, soon after Barent's arrival. He would have seen these structures. In 1673, Barent Island, right there, now a land and water baron, he quickly sets about building and operating his mills along that creek. Lumber was money, but for Barent, the patent wasn't enough. Barent expands his empire in Albany. Near to his father-in-law, Andres DeVoe, he buys a certain house lying within its fence with everything that's attached by earth and nail. It was also close to the creek named for DeVos, the Boston Kiln. It's also close to the Indian houses where Mohawks stay when they come to trade and socialize. Barent also purchases house, lot, hay barrack, barn, garden, and fruit trees located in the colony of Rensselaerwyck. Again, more. He acquires true, rightful, and free ownership to and for his benefit. The island named Scudder Island, located below Barent Island. And from the widow of Arent Van Curler, he signs in love and friendship a 6-year lease for an island lying in the south of the farm of Philip Schuyler and to the north of the farm of Mr. Van Rensselaer. On this tourist map of present-day Albany, you can see 2 red stars. DeVos's home was near the Palace Theater and North Pearl Street. Barent is close by on Broadway, across the old Union train station, now an insurance agency. Barent goes after what he wants. Barent has property in and around Albany, and islands in the Hudson, and of course the vast patent. But he's greedy, he's ruthless, he's hard-hearted, and he goes after those who are vulnerable. Barent sues a woman who's known as Deaf Hester for unpaid debts owed him. Her second husband is killed in the Second Esopus War, 1663, and Hester is taken captive. Freed, she says she's a widow, she's no money, she tries to protect her remaining assets. And Barent demands the court allow him to confiscate some of this poor woman's goods and effects. Another one. Part of Barent's business is lumbering, so it's no surprise he gets into an argument over sawing logs. Again, he goes after a widow. Helletia Bronk lives on the southern boundary of the Coeymans patent. She comes to court complaining that Barent comes on her land to cut logs where she's going to build a sawmill. The court sides with Helletia, saying Barent has countless square miles of forest on his own to refrain from cutting any more. That doesn't stop him. Helletia's son, Jan Bronk, gets into the fray, and he charges Barent with cutting logs on his mother's land. Barent loses again. But we can imagine him feigning innocence when he is recorded, documented as saying, but only 4 trees were cut. Well, one unfortunate man needs boards from Barent to mend his home, and he uses his home as collateral. A year later, he cedes and conveys to the benefit of Barent Pieterse, his heirs or assigns, his house, his lot, his garden, and everything belonging thereto. Another one. Jan Stewart is murdered in an assault by native Iroquois, and soon after, Barent demands his family pay debts that their husband and father owes them. He's an equal opportunity Scrooge, but not only does he harangue neighbors and those less fortunate, he isn't afraid to take on the bigwigs of the Upper Hudson. And how does he repay Governor Lovelace, who authorized his vast patent? He refuses to provide the lumber for the governor's new home. No, I'm not going to do that. Despite becoming the owner of one of the largest parcels of privately owned land in the colony, Barent challenges his tax assessment of 12,000 guilders. He swears not worth more than 8,000. The year is 1675. The ink is barely dry on his governmental pen. Not only does this demonstrate Barent's stinginess, it also informs us of his staggering wealth. He had accumulated a lot, given his humble beginning as a miller's youngin. Barent now operates 2 mills on the creek, a grist mill and a sawmill. By 1683, the table of fortunes is reversed between the Van Rensselaer patroonship and their miller's apprentice. The Van Rensselaer patroon now owes Barent 4,000 florins. The letters that Jeremiah Van Rensselaer's widow writes, and Maria, let me start again. The letters that Jeremiah Van Rensselaer's widow Maria writes and received have several telling references to Barent's tenacious demand to settle accounts. The Van Rensselaers in Amsterdam, not New Amsterdam, in Amsterdam, they received letters from Barent's lawyers demanding what is due him from the estate of Jan Baptist Van Rensselaer. Richard Van Rensselaer, the patroon in Amsterdam, describes himself as troubled, more like angry. He writes to Maria back here on the Hudson River, Barent pays no rent. Do not pay what we owe him until he pays what he owes for the water rights of his saw and grist mills near Barren Island. He directs Maria, self-forms Maria, so as to get rid of Barent Pieterse. You must press Barent hard about the rent of the water power, as it belongs to our jurisdiction. Poor Maria, she's crippled. She's widowed. She's the mother of 6 children. Her house was washed away in a flood. She writes back to her husband's family in Amsterdam, if I do not have the land and the mill, how am I to make a living with my 6 children, especially as I am such a feeble woman? I have nothing that is my own. I sink deeper into debt and cannot pay my creditors either, but must live by the grace of others. Richard in Amsterdam is unmoved. He writes back, you must press Barent hard about the rent of the water power. And just in case she hadn't gotten the message, he put a P.S. at the end of the letter. And this is what it said. I beg you, please see to it that I get rid of Barent the miller, and do not give him any peace, and make him pay rent. Maria writes back, Barent the miller has been to see me. He was very angry that you had withheld his money. We had harsh words. It would be another 20 years before this argument over debts and water rights was resolved. One business relationship of Barent's does have an amicable conclusion. After leasing the patroon sawmill on 5th Creek for 26 years, Barent and Tunis Cornelissen agree in 1680 that their partnership is mutually liquidated in love and friendship, and that neither owes the other as much as a stiver's worth, and all of which is done without fraud or deceit. And it is the end to a beautiful and lucrative friendship, and about this time the surname Coeymans begins to appear with regularity. Yes, that's Jack Nicholson. What you are about to hear is not a thumbnail account of historical events. It's a pinky account. It begins in 1688. The Catholic King of England, James II, orders the annexation of the province of New York to the Dominion of New England. Francis Nicholson is appointed Lieutenant Governor of New York. James would soon lose his crown, but not his head. He goes in exile to France, where they're Catholics, and he's fine. I couldn't find a picture of Nicholson because there doesn't exist one, but I thought Jack Nicholson would do just fine. 1688 was also the year of the Glorious Revolution. Willem of Orange, the Dutch stadtholder, is married to James's daughter, Mary. Mary's not Catholic, she's Protestant, and she's heir to the English throne. Taking advantage of political unrest in England, what does Willem do? He deposes his brother-in-law, the Catholic James. William and Mary sail over to England. They're crowned constitutional monarchs of England. 1688 is also marks the beginning of the 9 Years' War of France versus many others conflict that reaches across the Atlantic to the American colonies. The American colonial representative of Willem, now William II of England, has not yet arrived. Francis Nicholson runs home to England. Now, stick with me on this. This is Leisler's Rebellion. This is a picture of, to fill the vacant leadership before all of King William's people are able to be replaced, or replace all of the previous administration. To fill that vacant leadership, a militia loyal to William and Mary, because the Protestants, they seized the fort in Manhattan in May of 1689. Enter Jacob Leisler, a man of German descent who emigrated to New England in 1660. He's an educated, staunch Protestant merchant with military experience. He drafts a declaration. A drum is used to support the signing of the declaration, and it reads in part, "As soon as the bearer of orders from the Prince of Orange, the new King of England, shall let us see his power, then without delay we do intend to obey, not the orders only, but also the bearer thereof." Leisler becomes commander of the militia in the interim. He sets himself up as head lieutenant governor of the New York colony and appoints a council. But Leisler has his detractors. Many are wealthy landowners who were promised protection of their property by the previous administration of King James. Albany's Peter Schuyler and Robert Livingston are among those who oppose Leisler. However, tenants of those wealthy men side with Leisler, who espouses, ready for this, no taxation without representation. Sound familiar? Albany becomes a refuge for anti-Leislerians from New York City. But Leisler has a plan to secure Albany and to march against the French and their Native American allies who threaten areas like Albany and Schenectady. We all know what happens to Schenectady in December 1690. Leisler's forces weren't there in time to prevent the massacre. A month later, the English authorities sail into New York Harbor. Leisler does not accept that authority because they do not carry official documents. He's hanged. He's beheaded in March of 1691. And the Leisler's rebellion is over. But the pro and anti-Leislerian factions linger after his death. It's the forerunner of the two-party system in the United States. But how does all this take a part in Barent's story? Leisler names Barent Coeymans as a member of the council in Albany, a role that does not endear him to the upper Hudson aristocrats, who were all anti-Leislerians and had fled Albany for Connecticut and Massachusetts during this time of rebellion. This tells us something about Barent. He aligns himself with tenants, not landowners, although he voraciously acquires properties in and around Albany. Tenants also have a desire to own their own land, just as Barent did. Leislerian politics may also explain a mystery. After Barent's death, Andres, his oldest son and heir, transfers ownership of the lucrative patent to his brothers and sisters, and he moves to New Jersey. Why does this eldest son turn his back on his fortune and his financial security here? Well, Andres doesn't agree with his father's politics. He becomes a player in the governmental and business community of Albany, and he's called in court a powerful man. He even represents the interests of the Van Rensselaer Manor in the Colonial Assembly from 1701 to 1702, about 10 years after the rebellion. He marries Gertrude Stotts, though, the daughter of Dr. Samuel Stotts, a Leislerian who's tried for treason. She's also the sister of Joachim Stotts, who's commanded Leiserian forces at Albany. Andres has a lot in common with Gertrude. They both grew up on the river, right across the river here. Both are children of discredited Leiserian fathers, shunned by Albany patricians. The lingering resentments in Albany of Leiserian politics may have played a part in why Barent's oldest son and heir, Andres, left the expansive Coeymans patent of his Leiserian father for New Jersey. Andres becomes business partners with two anti-Leislerians, Isaac Gouverneur and Lucas Mars Jr. All the men marry Stotts' sisters. I'd like you to imagine that 1700. You are sailing from New York City, up Hudson's River, the North River. Your destination is Albany. You sail against the current, and twice a day the tide. The trip may take as long as a week depending on the wind, and you see mile after mile trees and mountains where the wind is brisk, and after 4 days you sail between a small island and the bank of river, just as Barent did. And then you see this. This is the house that Barent built. It's the lovely painting that Mark Peckham made for me. It's how Barent's house on the Hudson would have appeared to those sailing past, minus the addition on the right that his daughter Ariantia built 20 years later. Imagine your astonishment. 1700, all the buildings, maybe a story, maybe a loft within a story. After days of wooded landscape, this monumental structure appears, not in the middle of a city, but in the middle of a wilderness. It dwarfs anything built in or around Albany. This is a tranquil scene, but in reality, it's very different. Life in and around Barent's home is noisy, it's busy. There are voices from the workers, the servants, the slaves, some natives perhaps, and then there is Barent himself shouting orders. And the sound of cows and chickens and dogs and the crash of planks and bags of grain thrown onto the dock and onto the waiting boats. And there's the whir behind all of that, the water rushing down the rocky terraces, through the sluices and over the mill of the wheel, and splashing into the rocks below. And for many years, it was believed Barent's daughter Ariantia built this house with her brother Samuel when they came into their inheritance after Barent's death. Indeed, it's described as Ariantia Coeymans' house, most likely because of her monumental portrait. But dendrochronology has proven that it was Barent himself who built this magisterial house in 1700, 10 years before his death. It's a lasting monument of Barent's perseverance. I will leave it to the present owners to make a presentation one day about the history and the curation of their historic home. You remember my showing you the Romer map of Albany. Here's another Romer map. How important is Barent's house to river travelers? This towering house and accompanying mills are noted on maps as it's a landmark or a river mark. It's like a lighthouse. It's a beacon that you are now very close to Albany. And here is a detail of that map. Do you see Van Rensselaer's? Do you see Schuyler's? Do you see Livingston's? No, there's one. It's Barent. And that's on a Romer map. This map was made, Romer himself, you can see the dotted line that goes underneath the the Mohawk River there. And that was the Indian trail that he had taken with the Indians going west, all through the 5 tribes of the Iroquois. And what do you see here? Here's the name again. Is it, now you see the Schuyler, the Rensselaer have been added to the name Coeymans, but it's still there. And notice the spelling of the name. And so much of the name is phonetic, is the way they would have heard it, is what they're writing. So imagine Coeymans there. And then the next one, Coeymans. And then what's important? The sawmill. And that's now indicated. And another one. And now what do we know? The house. I know it says whole, but it means house. And 68 years after it was built, Barent's grand house remains a milepost for the river travelers. The creek now carries the name Coeymans Kill, and I wish it still was called Kill today. This map has 2 circles, one indicating Barent's house, and is the other to indicate a mill or Barent's first house on the other side of the kill. So you see there are 2 little circles within the red circle. Do you see them there? Many of you are familiar with these pictures. On the left is the house Barent lived in with his family south of the creek before the grand house was built. It's also often referred to as the Queen's Castle. Another structure now occupies that site in the corner of First and Westerlo and Queen's Landing. On the right, the great stone house north of the creek. This is a 100-year-old photo taken of a portion of an overmantel that was painted during the lifetime of Barent's children, probably around the 1730s. The Hotelings gave or sold it to the Holland Society, who have lost it. This map of 1767 shows Barent's first and second houses on either side of the Coeymans Creek. One can also see the proximity to 3 islands that were the historic summer homes of Catskill Mohicans. Barent built himself a Dutch-inspired house. On the left is a close-up of Stuyvesant's house in New Amsterdam. Notice the similarities to Barent's house. The center door and the gable that rises above to the roof line, the number and spacing of the windows. The other house is in Amsterdam. It's the famous House of the 3 Canals. It was a sensation when it was built, and maybe this house made an impression on the young Barent. And how did Barent crown that conspicuous house? With a weather vane, a conspicuously anatomically correct stag. Barent's showstopper house had its effect on the Van Rensselaers. They couldn't get rid of the miller. He was here to stay. He was succeeding while they were struggling. 36 years after the purchase of the patent, and 6 years after the house was built, the Van Rensselaers and Barent resolved their differences. Barent agrees that he and his heirs will pay a paltry 9 shillings quit rent to the lord of the manor. The Van Rensselaer manors surrender their land. Also diminished is their standing in the 18th century Forbes list of wealthiest families of the Upper Hudson. Not yet satisfied, Andres pursues a royal confirmation of the Coeymans patent. Oops. As Shirley Dunn wrote, Mohicans retained their status in the eyes of the law prior to the Revolution. Signed Mohican deeds were required for any speculator who wanted to develop Mohican land. In 1709, 9 descendants of the original Catskill Mohican signers testified that before Barent Coeymans, this land had never been sold to any previous Christians, specifically the Van Rensselaers. Here you see them agree that they were fully paid and contented. In return, Barent received full satisfaction for the same. And they signed it. Here are the signatures of the Catskill Mohicans. 2 women, 7 men signed this testimony on the day after Christmas, 1672. Wasn't that a present? Their uncle Magda, the sachem of the Catskill Mohicans, conveyed land to Barent that begins at Jan Bronk's Kill, the Cuxsaki Creek. Remember the Jan Bronks that they were having an argument with? It stretches north to a marked tree in the middle of Jan Ryer's Island, where the Vlomenkill empties into the Hudson. So you can go to the Henry Hudson Park, you can kind of look down the river and see that. And it goes westward from those 2 points as far as the station's right extends about 12 miles away. So, here comes the royal confirmation. 1714, Andres asks for and receives the royal confirmation. He provided that testimony as documentation. Queen Anne's confirmation may not have been signed, though, by her royal hand. It is dated the 26th of August, 1714, 20 days after her actual death. Her supporters hustled the German Protestant prince, George of Hanover, to the throne before the Catholic and closer relative James Stuart could assume the crown. Though the precise date of her death is concealed, it was more difficult to conceal the Queen. She was buried in Westminster Abbey to accommodate her plus-sized, gout-stricken body. The corpulent monarch was laid to rest in a square coffin. This is, yeah. This is Barent's inventory. Barent dies without a will in 1710. And I wondered whether or not he didn't put a will together, because he wasn't really too happy with his son. Remember, he was a Lislerian, and his son was an anti-Lislerian. So I wonder if there wasn't a little tension there. That's just conjecture, of course. He leaves behind a daughter from his first marriage, Gertrude, who married Jacob ten Eyck. She will not inherit anything. But her children and her grandchildren will benefit indirectly from Barent's patent. 4 of the 5 of the children from Barent's second marriage are unmarried. All except 1 are 40 or older. The oldest son, Andres, inherits everything. Yanetcha, the youngest, marries Dirk Bensing, the owner and operator of a riverboat. And I like to imagine that she runs her sails away with him from her overbearing father. But the inventory includes many household items: cloth, pots and pans, kettles and silver, and listed above 40 head of black cattle, 20 swine, old and young, 24 sheep and lamb. One reads, 4 Negro men and 1 with boy, 3 Negro women, and 4 children, all valued at 300 pounds. Yes, the Coeymans count enslaved people as property, and none are identified with names. If New Netherland remained a Dutch colony, Barent's estate would have been divided between his children. But it is an English colony. Primogeniture rules. Andre Coeymans is the firstborn son. He inherits the money, the land, the creeks, all the structures, houses, mills, barns, docks, hay barracks, and everything in them, including the enslaved men, women, and children. But Andres has other plans. He follows the lead of his uncle Lucas and his sister Yanetcha. He and his wife relocate to New Jersey and New York City. But before he leaves, Andres conveys almost all of the patent to his 2 brothers and 1 sister who remain on their father's land and in his homes. Peter's conveyance is in love and affection and separate from that of Samuel and Ariantia. Peter gets land, his father's first home known as the Queen's Castle. Although it is smaller than the great stone house on the hill, he's married, he's got a family, and he pays Andres for this land and the house 5 shillings. Samuel and Ariantia, still unmarried, share ownership of land, mills, the great stone house. Absent are the words love and affection. And they have to pay Andres 1,500 pounds, the equivalent today, 400,000. Andres' sister Yanetcha, half-sister Gertrude, they're married, nothing. Andres gives them nothing. But Andres did not forget his Tenite cousins. At the end of each conveyance to Samuel and Ariantia, and over here to Peter, he had this private little door for the Tenites. And it read, when Peter or Samuel or Ariantia were short of cash, all right, the end of each conveyance says they're forbidden to sell property to anyone that's not descended from Barent Coeymans. So here comes the private door that's open to the Tenites. When Peter or Samuel or Ariantia need money, they turn to one of their Tenite cousins who never lived down here until they were in Albany. The Tenites got property within the patent for cash that they were given. And when the Tenites were ready to get married, who did they look to? The family. They looked to Peter's family across the river and their children who would inherit their father's portion of the patent. So while all this was happening, Andres was far away in New Jersey. Here you can see the proximity of Andres and his uncle Lucas. Where Andres led the life of a gentleman, Lucas continued as a miller. Both had children, but only Lucas left grandsons to carry on the Coeymans' name. And you can see I circled Utrecht only because the records say that he came from Utrecht. So I was like, yeah, we'll put that in there. And this is the second river. The second river empties into the Passaic River, and the Passaic empties into New York Harbor. It's well situated. And in this late 19th century map, you can see the names of the Coeymans' residences in Belleville. 5 names in all. They are all descendants of Lucas Coeymans, Barent's uncle, or Barent's brother. And at the top, you will recognize a name if you live here in the town of Coeymans. What is it? Jerome, right. Just like our 160-acre farm. I went looking for an early New Jersey cemetery, hoping to find the Coeymans brothers. And a family cemetery once existed behind 3 of the Coeymans' side-by-side homes along the Passaic River. Their homes are gone. But on a map is the location of that cemetery, once the parking lot of a chemical company and now a car repair shop. Many of us who have researched the Coeymans family have wondered where Barent and his children were buried. Several locations have been suggested west of the mills, north of the house, a Whitbeck property. To these, I want to add another. This document is dated the 7th of October, 1723. It was just 3 months after Ariantia Coeymans, age 51, married her husband, 28-year-old David Verplank. I believe this document marks the beginning of Barent's second family of 5 children, ensuring the patent remained in the family. Here, Andres acknowledges the legitimacy of the descendants of Barent's first wife. Andres protects the rights of the children of his stepsister, Gertrude Coeymans tonight. This document also reveals the location of a Coeymans cemetery. I'll read an edited portion. I, Andres Coeymans of the City of New York, Esquire, do hereby order and direct and fully authorize and empower my nephew, Conrad Ten Eyck of the City of Albany, to keep possession of that lot of ground near Albany City, where is a burying place of my family, being on the south, the highway, on the west, the churchyard, and on the north, Mrs. Rensselaer, and then he gives the measurement in rods and feet. This was granted to my father, Barent Coeymans, by Richard Nichols, the governor, the 29th day of April, 1669. You got that wrong. 1667. 67 it is. Andres described this as being near the pastures, a grazing area in 1723. Today, the pastures is a residential area at the bottom of Madison Avenue, all right, headed south, and that still goes by the name Pastures. This may be the burial site for Andre de Vos, his first wife, and his daughter Barent's first wife. Is it the burial site for others? Among their other jobs, both Conrad and his son Jakob were silversmiths. Conrad made this tankard. And as an aside, I would love to come one day to hear a talk about the Ten Eycks on the patent, how they married their cousins, the descendants of Peter Coeymans, how they came to live in the grand stone house, and how they benefited from the disposition of the patent after the deaths of Barent's second family's children. So as a bit of introduction to that talk, I'd like to end my talk with a brief explanation of that disposition. This is the Metcalfe map. After the death of all the children of Barent's second family, the disposition, the dividing of the patent begins. As the Ten Eycks begin this process, Andre's son-in-law, Abraham Lot, comes up from New Jersey to defend his wife's inheritance. He keeps a journal that reads in part, I breakfasted with Anthony Ten Eyck, who labored under a severe fit of piles. He promised to show me every paper relating to the estate, but nothing was done. It is Abraham Lot who's responsible for the drawing up of the map we saw earlier, with all the residences within the patent. The first step was a survey. This is the field book dated February 1788 that records the survey of the entire patent that was awarded to Andres Coeymans, his heirs and assigns forever and always by Queen Anne in 1714. The patent is divided into allotments and lots, and each allotment and lot is measured, and those measurements are recorded in the second field book. Also recorded are those properties previously conveyed, like this one, given away by Ariana Coeymans. Included are those parcels previously conveyed to Ten Eyck relations. This page describes the house and lot wherein Conrad Ten Eyck now lives, also garden and orchard. The house here is the great stone house that Barent built. The surveyors also used precise measurements, chains and rods and feet, but they also used ephemeral landmarks like trees and stones. We read 115 chains to a maple tree. Chains are precise, maple tree not so much. Also used to determine a boundary is the Indian footpath, a route that would later develop into a road. I didn't know what a chain was. I don't know if you know what a chain is. So, in case you don't, I was wondering, and I found the answer. In the Netherlands, one can see clearly how to measure rods and feet. On the wall of Leiden's City Hall is etched the length of a rod. There's also a foot-long bar. These were used as the standard. The photo of Gunther's chain shows how surveyors would stretch and pin the links to count the distance measured. And then they pinned them. A rod was 16.5 feet, a chain equals 4 rods or 66 feet. 100 square chains equal an acre. The hero in James Fenimore Cooper's anti-rent book, called Little Page Manuscripts, was called Chain Bearer. That was his nickname. James Fenimore Cooper gave that person the name Andres Coeymans. Chain bearer. And to make sure there was no confusion, a map accompanies the survey. It indicates the allotments, the land heretofore conveyed. If you're more interested, there's another one on the other side of that wall over there. Right, Joe? It indicates the allotments, and the second book recorded the ownership of each lot, which was decided by lottery. So some were conveyed, but they were also by lottery, but within the family, remember. And as Maria Van Rensselaer once said, and so it goes, one piece after another. And from what I understand, it still happens today. One piece after another, the Coeymans property. This is not Barent Pieterse Coeymans, but unfortunately, he did not leave us a portrait in oil and canvas, but he did leave us a sketch in the documents, in his house, in the bills, in his children, and in the patent he was given title to 350 years ago. So, happy birthday to the town, for which he's remembered. Happy birthday, Coeymans, and to celebrate, I've left some Dutch treats for us to enjoy, and I'm happy to entertain any questions now. I'm going to leave him up there to stare at you. Any questions?